In this video, we will be covering how strong is the Monsterverse Godzilla. Given that the Monsterverse has a lot of material and is still, as of recording this video, ongoing, we will be covering the first couple of chronological stories in this timeline, including the Godzilla Awakening comic, which is the prelude to the first movie of 2014's Godzilla, the follow-up to that movie, Godzilla Aftershock, the first season of Monarch Legacy of Monsters, and the 2019 movie Godzilla King of the Monsters. Starting off 250 million years ago during the Permian period, Godzilla faces off against this flying parasitic creature called the Shinomura, with the annoying ability to regenerate and split its body apart into a bunch of tiny pieces. He's able to easily destroy it with his atomic breath, but of course a single cell allows it to survive and continue living, and this fight is interrupted by a meteor dropping directly on Godzilla's head, which I guess in this timeline is supposed to be the explanation for the Permian Triassic extinction. After this, Godzilla hibernates, feeding off of radiation near the Earth's core, as time passes until the 1940s, with the dropping of the Hiroshima bomb in 1945 awakening both Godzilla and the Shinomura. This would begin a near decade-long pursuit of Godzilla, following the Shinomura all across the world. At some point during this, the Shinomura split up into two separate bodies before recombining in 1954. During this period, some of the humans who had learned of the monster's existence would form an organization dedicated to studying and combating these monsters, known as Monarch, and decided to dedicate the testing of the hydrogen bombs, known as Castle Bravo, to taking out said monsters. The Castle Bravo bomb is dropped on Godzilla and the Shinomura as they're fighting, completely incinerating the Shinomura and the humans believing Godzilla to be dead, only to be proven wrong sometime afterwards. However, this brings me to my first gripe about this particular version of Godzilla, specifically the inconsistencies with the timeline. See, we kind of get this same event happening in two separate sources from this comic. One being the start of the 2014 movie, which doesn't seem to show the Shinomura at all present, not to mention it seems that it was dropped on Godzilla as he was just beginning to surface from the ocean. The other is in Monarch Legacy of Monsters, where we actually see Godzilla surface, stare at the bomb before they detonate it. In fact, based off comments in the scene right before they detonate the bomb in Godzilla's face, it seems to imply this is the first time everyone's really getting a good look at it. Again, no Shinomura present in this scene. This has led to quite a bit of debates in the fan community on whether Godzilla Awakening is even canon at this point. At least as of 2019 and 2020, Legendary themselves still seem to believe it to be canon, as they included in this little image here showing all the stories in their little makeshift timeline, which includes Godzilla Awakening, not to mention the fact that apparently some events are referenced in one of the novels. I also want to point out a very common misconception is that Castle Bravo was just one nuke. No, it was actually several nukes being tested around that period of time. It's just that the most powerful of these nukes was what was named after the whole Castle Bravo test. Though I do want to point out whoever worked on the Monarch show chose to include this one character called Shaw, who at this point had only appeared in the Godzilla Awakening comic. On top of this, the foundation of Monarch itself has also been inconsistent, specifically in what year it was founded. Some of the guys at Legendary tried to explain this and saying it's like, oh, some of the events might be classified to some of the lower ranking personnel or something like that. Me, I personally think that the left hand of the lore keeping department doesn't know what the right hand is doing. I'll have more to say about these inconsistencies later, but basically, until Legendary themselves says otherwise, as far as I'm concerned, Godzilla Awakening is still canon, or at least some sort of soft canon, unless it's contradicted by later, more official live-action material. I personally choose to view all three events of the Castle Bravo bomb being canon, with the one detonated in Monarch being the first one, as it seems to be a lot of people's first time actually getting a good look at Godzilla. The second attempt was the one with the Shinomura, and the third and final attempt is the one we see in the opening of the 2014 movie. As you can see, they even painted a little anti-Godzilla symbol on it. They couldn't do that if they didn't know what his face looked like. Jumping 60 years into the future, 2014, a monster egg hatches, and out comes the Muto, which is an abbreviation for the term massive unidentified terrestrial organism. Yeah, this actual species doesn't have an official name, unlike literally every other monster that would pop up later in this universe. What's interesting is that the male Muto in particular was originally supposed to start off not having wings and would only get them partway through the film. In fact, while we're on this subject, Mutos went through quite a few design changes throughout the early process. After nearly an hour into the film, Godzilla finally shows up, and we get blueballed in the worst way possible. For goodness sake, Godzilla's fight against a giant condor in the Bear Horror of the Deep was at least longer than this. And they do it twice! Have you no sense? And yes, you heard me right, I referred to this as the male Muto, because halfway through the movie, a second female Muto emerges. One bigger, stronger, but also no ability to fly. Apparently, both of these were eggs that came from some sort of giant monster skeleton, which is stated to have apparently been of the same species as Godzilla. When asked if this skeleton was of Godzilla, Dr. Sarasawa directly states, no, this one is much more ancient, not contradicting her and saying that it's not a Godzilla species skeleton, but that it's simply an older member of the species. I'll have more to say on that particular subject later. Anyway, in San Francisco, Godzilla finally gets to have a proper fight against the two Mutos, and they prove why they were specifically a species that has adapted to fight Godzilla in particular. Apparently, in the original screenplay of the movie, the Mutos had an EMP ability that would enable them to disable Godzilla's atomic breath so he couldn't use it against them. We do see the Mutos pulling off an EMP ability several times throughout the movie, though it's never directly confirmed if it also has the added ability of disabling Godzilla's atomic breath like it did in the screenplay. When Godzilla does finally use his atomic breath, it comes out more as like a whitish-blue flame, unlike the more focused and powerful beam that it would be in later and prior uses, as it also looks quite a bit different in Godzilla Awakening. Godzilla spends quite a bit of this fight getting his butt handed to him, as whenever he seems to get the edge on one Muto, the other one shows up to knock him back. Their sharp, stabby legs are able to draw blood from Godzilla, as you can hardly see here, and they also exploit Godzilla's weakness being gills on his neck. Yeah, this Godzilla canonically has gills, and not just as a clever way to explain why in the original Suitmation versions they simply made some little vent slits in the throat area so that the actors wearing the suit could breathe. These gills have been shown to be vulnerable to even tank fire, and you can imagine when the Muto strikes it, it's going to hurt a lot more than a simple tank cannon exploding. But thanks to human intervention as they try to stop the Muto's eggs from hatching by blowing them up, Godzilla is able to get back to a one-on-one fight against the male Muto and decides to just tail swipe him into the side of a building, which crushed him so hard his wings fell off. Finally, he's able to sneak behind the female Muto while she's distracted and kill her with the famous kiss of death, where he fires his atomic breath directly down her throat. The novelization of this fight is even crazier, with apparently Godzilla having lost like 80% of his blood, and also apparently instead of the kiss of death, he just slaps the female Muto's head off. Godzilla collapses from exhaustion, but wakes back up later in the morning, and slowly makes his way back to the ocean, having humanity question whether he is friend or foe, as he actually went out of his way to avoid the humans throughout the whole movie, even peacefully swam through the ocean with their ships flanking him, and also seemed to intentionally go out of his way to go around said ships, which I think showcases his intelligence, as well as his adaptability to facing the male Muto with his little tail swipe attack, as well as his skill in stealth as he decides to sneak attack female Muto in order to grab her and finish her off. A short while after this, the events of Godzilla Aftershock take place, where the Muto that birthed the previous two Mutos in the 2014 movie, the much older and powerful Muto Prime, awakens, and this thing is a beefy specimen, stated to be significantly heavier than Godzilla, though apparently shorter by just a tad bit. She's shown to be quite the adept at guerrilla warfare, as she actually prefers quick hit-and-run tactics rather than facing Godzilla head-on in a fight. Apparently the Muto Prime, upon awakening from her hibernation, was apparently in a weakened state, kind of similar to apparently how real-life bears are a little weakened after awakening from a sleep such as that. By the time the final battle occurs between the two, the Muto Prime has regained her full strength, and Godzilla's apparently been worn down a bit by the Muto Prime's repeated hit-and-run strikes. The Muto Prime can apparently scream at a frequency that just shatters Godzilla's dorsal plates, and he's about to be defeated and worse, impregnated by the Muto Prime so that the eggs can hatch and kill him from the inside out of alien xenomorph face huggers, when the humans use a device, which is basically the prototype of the Orca device, which will be in the 2019 movie, to distract the Muto Prime long enough for Godzilla to grab hold of the Muto Prime, lift it over his back, and then basically unleash a nuclear pulse to vaporize it. Turning back the clock a bit, we get some more insight on the mysterious Godzilla-like skeleton seen briefly in the 2014 movie that housed the two Muto eggs. This being now officially known as Dagon, but originally referred to as Adam, was supposedly a Godzilla ancestor, though according to Legendary, Toho does not want them to have multiple Godzillas, like at any period in this universe. So officially this monster is referred to as a Godzilla-like species, but come on, you can see clear as day this is meant to be another Godzilla. I don't really get what Toho's problem is with there being multiple Godzillas when they do it all the time in their movies. At least the creator of the Godzilla Aftershock story seems to be in the party that Dagon is supposed to be another Godzilla. This guy was also the one who wrote the 2019 King of the Monsters movie novelization and references these events as well. So at least according to the writer of both Aftershock and the 2019 novelization, as well as I guess maybe the 2014 novelization, Dagon is another Godzilla. What's interesting is that the writer refers to Dagon as actually being stronger than the Muto Prime, and Godzilla himself being stronger than Dagon due to having more access to radiation, but still being rather comparable in terms of power. I'll come back to this subject near the end of the video after we cover the 2019 movie, since we're still missing one more piece of this little puzzle to complete this power scaling, which thankfully the writer has quite helped simplify for us. Dagon suffered the same fate that Godzilla almost suffered, where even though he had fought against the Muto Prime and was able to survive the battle, he had been impregnated by the Muto Prime, and the eggs growing inside of him would eventually kill him, leading to the events of the 2014 movie. The writer speculates that he would have most likely had an atomic breath just like Godzilla, and the fact that due to not having as much radiation as Godzilla, he'd be a little taller, and we can get an idea of his height relative to the Muto Prime based off this little mural here, as we know the Muto Prime's official height, or relative official height. If I had to guesstimate and put a number on it, I'd say he's somewhere around the 80 to 85 meter ballpark, as he's definitely quite a bit shorter than the Muto Prime, who's just a little over 100 meters, while Monsterverse Godzilla at this point in time is 108 meters. Finally, to close off what's left of the pre-2019 stories, we've got the finale of the Monarch Legacy of Monsters TV series, taking place mostly in 2015, roughly a year after the events of both the 2014 movie and Aftershock, where Godzilla takes on this one monster called the Ion Dragon, who basically roughly seems comparable to the male Muto in terms of how well he does and gets destroyed against by Godzilla. All he does is just kind of fly around, spit acid in Godzilla's face, which does a little more than irritate him, before literally getting torn in half and thrown into the hollow earth vortex. Some of you might want to point out some power scaling related statements that have been brought up in this particular series, but that's going to have to wait for the part 2 video. I'm trying to keep things relative to all the events that occurred prior to Godzilla vs. Kong and Godzilla and Kong Possible. Trust me, it'll make more sense once we're able to cover those particular movies. Just put a pin in the whole Hollow Earth Vortex stuff for now. Our last story will be the 2019 movie Godzilla King of the Monsters, not to be confused with the original English release of the first movie, Godzilla King of the Monsters, or the Marvel comic from the 70s, or the Dark Horse comic from the 90s, or the Kodansha manga from the 90s, or the juvenile novel from Random House in the 90s, or the 1993 Game Boy game from the 90s, or the 1998 BBC documentary, also from the 90s. Jeez, the 90s, people were really struggling to come up with original titles. Just like with the last movie, this one takes place in the year that it came out. Monarch has constructed a device capable of mimicking the calls of the other monsters, referred to as the Orca, and it is with this Orca device that King Ghidorah is awakened from his icy prison in Antarctica. Fortunately, Godzilla shows up as King Ghidorah starts work at now with his regrown dorsal plates, and begins fighting the three-headed menace. Though it becomes obvious pretty quickly that Godzilla has met his match, as while he manages to get a few good hits in on King Ghidorah is just simply too fast to hit with Godzilla's atomic breath. Not to mention his gravity beams are powerful enough to push Godzilla off the stage. And by the time military reinforcements show up, King Ghidorah decides he has other things to do and flies off, ending the first round. Sometime later, and King Ghidorah gets into a brief scuffle with Rodan, who does manage to fight King Ghidorah for a little bit before ultimately giving up and flying off. However, this fight, King Ghidorah gets a little too close to the water, and Godzilla pops out to drag him down into the ocean depths, where he has the terrain advantage. So much so, in fact, that Godzilla almost wins, actually tearing off one of King Ghidorah's heads, before the military decides unceremoniously and literally out of the blue to drop the oxygen destroyer on the boat. This nearly kills Godzilla, and King Ghidorah is completely immune to this because apparently he doesn't breathe oxygen, so it has no effect on him whatsoever. No trace of oxygen in his body whatsoever. Godzilla retreats to his underwater lair, where it's stated that it would take him several years to recover. Humans don't have that amount of time, so they basically set off a nuke in his face to hopefully revitalize him with the radiation. It works, and Godzilla emerges taller and stronger than ever, roughly nearly 12 meters taller and roughly 9,000 metric tons heavier. Generally about a 10% increase in height and weight. After psyching out the humans and aura farming for a bit, he is joined by the military in a pretty epic start to the final fight of the movie, as round 3 begins against King Ghidorah. And this time Godzilla's definitely proven a lot better. He pushes around King Ghidorah several times through buildings, and is smart enough to now target the chest area so King Ghidorah can't dodge it. Though as we can see here, the atomic breath doesn't seem to do much more than just simply push King Ghidorah back a couple hundred meters. Mothra joins the fight and pins down Mothra's heads with her webbing, so Godzilla will have easier time getting around the 3 heads are better than 1 problem. But Rodan shows up to assist King Ghidorah, turning this fight into a 2v2. Rodan definitely seems to be overpowering Mothra for the most part as he manages to pin her against the building, but Mothra manages to seize victory from the clutches of defeat when she stabs through Rodan's shoulder with her little stinger thing. Though Rodan is still, of course, very much alive, as we can see him flapping his wings around on the ground below in this one shot. King Ghidorah, deciding he needs his own power, decides to absorb the energy from an electric power grid, which supercharges him to the point where he unleashes like 100 lightning bolts, powerful enough to even sear the flesh off Godzilla, as you can see the burn marks around his head here. After picking up Godzilla and dropping him from the stratosphere, Godzilla is pretty much out for the count. Not to mention the fact that when he got his energy boost from the nuclear explosion, it pretty much supercharged him to the point where his energy is unstable and he's about to explode. As we can see with the glowing red cracks on his body, he doesn't have much time left. Mothra gives her life to try and save Godzilla, and we can see her energy flowing into Godzilla as she dies. And you can even hear Godzilla let out like a mournful cry in this happens. But Mothra's sacrifice was not in vain. As we see, it apparently gives Godzilla the ability to control his overload of energy as he enters his burning state, referred to specifically in this version of events as thermonuclear Godzilla, as we can see buildings literally melting around him. He unleashes a nuclear pulse against King Ghidorah after tanking his gravity beams to the chest with no sign of damage or flinching whatsoever. In fact, Godzilla almost seems to be smiling in this one shot. He unleashes his nuclear pulse several times to just disintegrate King Ghidorah and all the buildings around him, and if you pause here, you can actually see what looks like Mothra's wings making up part of the nuclear pulse. Afterwards, when Godzilla's exhausted his energy, he seems to be back to normal, and we see all the other Titan monsters show up around him, but after growling at Rodan, they all decide to bow and acknowledge him as the new king of the monsters. And we close the film on the most impressive ending shot to a Godzilla movie since Godzilla vs. Destroyer. This is as far as we'll go for the part 1 video, as I plan on saving the future stories for part 2. So, to sum up everything, what are the feats of this particular Godzilla so far? Going roughly in chronologic order, let's start from the beginning with Godzilla Awakening and him surviving the Permian-Triassic extinction event. Well, in this story it's depicted as a meteor, but in real life it wasn't actually caused by that. Most scientists believe it was actually caused by a bunch of volcanic activity in Siberia. Though given that this event wiped out roughly 70 to 80% of all life, it would have to be similar to the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event, aka the event that wiped out the dinosaurs, which also achieved roughly the same amount of casualties. In this context, in order to be able to wipe out that much life, and assuming that it was caused by a singular impact from a meteor, the meteor in question would have to be the same as said Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event, which was calculated to have an impact force of 100 teratons, which is just barely reaching the large country level in power. Godzilla seems to be pretty fine after taking this impact almost directly to the face, only seemed to just fling him into the water and that's it. Similarly, the guys behind creating this particular Godzilla, the 2014 version, stated in a video interview that he can swing his tail fast enough to break the sound barrier, so physically he already reaches the supersonic attack at combat speed. He literally eats city-level nukes for breakfast, and I've seen people actually compare how Godzilla looks in the 1954 scene in Monarch to how he looks in the 2014 movie, and people pointed out how he looks a little bit skinnier compared to his 2014 look, suggesting that all those nuclear tests help fatten him up quite a bit. This Godzilla is definitely a brawler, relying more on physical attacks than his atomic breath. The Muto Prime was stated to be roughly 50% heavier than Godzilla, which would put it roughly at around 135,000 metric tons, and King Ghidorah is around 141,000 tons. Despite this clear weight difference, Godzilla seemed to have a little trouble lifting the Muto Prime above him, and can still tussle with King Ghidorah as well. It was stated by the animators who worked on the 2019 movie that Godzilla, when he starts running towards King Ghidorah at the start of the climax of the film, would have to be running at roughly 200 miles per hour. Also, yeah, just the sheer fact that this Godzilla can run. Official Monarch sources have stated that he can swim at roughly 40 knots, but the 2019 movie actually states he can swim in speeds excess of 60 knots. He spends almost the entirety of the first movie pursuing the two Mutos around the world with no rest at all. I've seen some people claim that because Godzilla just woke up, he's like kind of weakened, like how a bear who just woke up from hibernation would be weakened. I'm not sure if I fully agree with that logic, since that doesn't seem to nerf any of the other monsters who have been asleep way longer than Godzilla, not to mention to the fact that he was just awake 60 years prior. Before that, he had been asleep for like millions of years beforehand. I feel like 60-year nap compared to like a 250 million year nap should basically be like just closing your eyes for 6 minutes. The guy's definitely been shown to take a beating and has also been observed holding his own against multiple multiple opponents with the Mutos, specifically creatures that were designed to be able to deal damage against Godzilla. In fact, it was also apparently stated by the Muto creators that a Muto would be custom fit to combat any version of Godzilla, regardless. So if you were to have a Muto hatch from an egg in the Heisei timeline, it would somehow be custom tailored to combat Heisei Godzilla, and so on and so forth with all the other versions. Though it should be noted that both Mutos individually were far weaker than Godzilla, and even the Muto Prime had to resort to hit and run tactics just to wear down Godzilla as well. Though it was also stated that the Mutos are really only meant to fight Godzilla specifically, and that they would struggle against other similarly powered monsters like King Ghidorah and another monster we're going to talk about in the Part 2 video, Kamatas. Godzilla's demonstrated adaptability to his opponents, specifically when fighting the male Muto, how he struggles to hit him, but then just waits for him to charge at him before slamming into the side of a building with a tail swipe, as well as incorporating stealth tactics to sneak up on the female Muto from behind and kill her with the kiss of death, since hitting her with his atomic breath from the outside didn't seem to do more than just simply push her back. Further evidence that Godzilla's atomic breath was likely weakened in the Muto fight, as we see a more normal looking atomic breath even in the beginning of the 2019 movie. I've heard some people argue that because Godzilla's dorsal plates grew back bigger, that he should also be stronger as a result, though the people behind Godzilla's design likened this to like an elk growing out its antlers. I wouldn't say that an elk with bigger antlers is necessarily stronger than an elk with shorter antlers. It's probably better for intimidation displays and stuff. I wouldn't say much more. But also, since the dorsal plates are used for energy storage, maybe it means he can hold slightly more energy than in 2014? Without knowing the exact height difference between his dorsal plates in 2014 versus 2019, I can't say for sure, so I'm just simply going to say that Godzilla at the beginning of 2019 is the same in power as he was in 2014. Apparently the nuke that Serizawa detonated in Godzilla's lair was apparently strong enough to be classified as country level, apparently being 3 to 7.6 teratons. Jeez, that's like the strongest nuke in existence, and that would be even stronger than all the other nukes in the world put together. I think this is based off of how far out the explosive radius reaches, as they were quite a ways underwater in the submarine, and we could still see it reaching almost what looks like the surface from underwater right before the submarine surfaces. I'm not 100% on board with this argument, to be honest. I just can't see a man-portable nuke being able to unleash country levels of attack potency. Shown on both this Monarch website, which was a thing during the promotion of the 2019 movie, as well as on this one computer monitor in the 2019 movie itself, we see Ghidorah generate these massive storms all over the world, one of which is like half the size of Brazil. These storms have been calculated to be in the large island level range, and King Ghidorah is just creating these by just lying around. This is like a passive effect from him. Now, according to this little page here, Godzilla's atomic breath is apparently supposed to be the strongest weapon in nature, which means theoretically it should upscale the 1960 Valdivia earthquake, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, which had an attack potency of 74 teratons, putting it in the high country level range. That's not that much further down from the hypothetical Permian extinction meteor. Similarly, Godzilla should have similar attack and reaction speed to King Ghidorah, who was able to dodge Godzilla's atomic breath after it was already fired, and he wasn't that far away when he fired it too. I can't go into details yet on how fast Godzilla's atomic breath is until we get into material from Part 2, but King Ghidorah similarly has massive hypersonic attack speed with his natural lightning that he shoots out of his mouth. The novel also apparently implies that King Ghidorah's storm is apparently 100 times stronger than normal after absorbing electricity from the power plant. I think this might be a little overblown, especially with evidence we'll cover in the Part 2 video, so I'm not going to go with it. According to the 2019 novel, Godzilla could also sense King Ghidorah from thousands of miles away, just to make it clear that it'd be pretty hard to sneak up on this guy since he can literally sense you like halfway across the planet. As for the whole nature's strongest weapon statement, well, I'm not really sure what this picture comes from. Blame the Versus Wiki for not sourcing all their evidence, but if I had to guess, this might be from a 2019 art book, given that it has the 2019 year printed near the bottom of this picture. Apparently the Muto Prime can also cause potentially multi-continental attack potency by basically doing some kind of pressure point strike, though apparently this ability is very circumstantial and not something the Muto Prime can normally do. Just thought I'd include that little tidbit of information. I'm not really going to be getting into the power difference of all these other monsters that show up at the end of the 2019 movie, because, well, they don't really do anything at this point, other than just simply show up. But I will include some little tidbits. We see a female Muto among the crowd here. Her name is Barb, and I guess apparently she's the last Muto in existence. Apparently it was stated by the designer that if left alone long enough, she will eventually evolve into a Muto Prime, which I guess is good. It means we might one day get a live-action Muto Prime, since Monarch Legacy of Monsters doesn't seem to want to touch that. Referred to as a Queen Muto, the Queen Muto is sort of like an in-between stage from the female Muto and the Muto Prime. The writer of Godzilla Aftershock stated that Godzilla is stronger than Dagon, who is apparently stronger than the Muto Prime, who should be significantly stronger than the Queen Muto, who should be maybe just a teeny bit stronger than the female Muto, who should be, again, a little significantly stronger than the male Muto given the height and weight difference. And thanks to this, I was able to sort of draw up a little numeric power scaling between the weakest being the male Muto and the strongest being Godzilla 2014 edition. It's up to you if you want to believe that Godzilla prior to this 1950s nuclear buffet was equal in power to Dagon, or if he was already stronger than Dagon even before 1954. I put the Ion Dragon in the same ballpark as the male Muto because, yeah, both literally get torn apart by Godzilla's attacks, and can't really do any significant damage to him without help anyway. Rodan was definitely stronger than Mothra, and at least managed to put up a fight against King Ghidorah unlike Mothra. Though to be fair, Mothra was already weakened by the time she actually tried to fight King Ghidorah head-on. So I'd honestly put him around the same ballpark as Dagon, or maybe just around the same strength as the Muto Prime. I personally don't see Mothra taking on the Muto Prime. She's just got way too much muscle to be able to not do anything against Mothra, I'm sorry. As for how strong I think 2019 Godzilla is compared to 2014, well, again, I feel like Godzilla wasn't that much weaker than King Ghidorah in the first fight, and honestly, I don't think he's overwhelmingly stronger than King Ghidorah in their final fight either. I'd say it's just a little bit of a power difference between the two at all times. So I'm honestly going to say he's maybe about 50% stronger versus his 2014 self. Enough to close the gap and even surpass King Ghidorah, but not by a large amount. Finally, I want to address the whole nature's strongest weapon statement, as some people have used it to take a huge leap in logic, saying it's like, oh, that should include stuff occurring in nature and space, which would be like black holes and gamma ray bursts, which would get Godzilla up to solar system level. I don't know about that. I mean, when you say a term like nature, that can refer to a lot of stuff, and I'm not even sure if that's what the creators meant when saying that. Otherwise, I feel like they would have said the strongest weapon in the universe or something like that. But maybe I can be wrong. We have way more feats and evidence to talk about in the part 2 video, so I hope you'll join me for that. See you in the next part, folks. Take care.